Hello and welcome back to another Warcraft video. This time we're going to be talking about the Quilboar, Razorfen Downs and Razorfen Crawl. I've decided that I should probably go over, well essentially I was going over all the dungeons of Azeroth, and really there's some times where each dungeon doesn't really deserve a lore video and I can kind of stick it into one big video like this, so hopefully it should be a good bit of fun. Anyway, let's get into the video itself. So the Quilboar are the mortal descendants of a demigod by the name of Agmagan, who was basically just a ginormous boar, like a big-ass boar. And during the War of the Ancients, Cenarius convinced Agmagan that he must take the fight to the Legion, else essentially the world would be destroyed. Demigods are, as it turns out, pretty damn powerful, and they're very handy to have about when you're fighting the Burning Legion. So yeah, he agreed, and eventually he would end up being defeated by Manoroth, and that happened in what we now call the Barrens. His sacrifice allowed Malfurion and his party to enter Ashara's city, where he could start to work on destroying the Well of Eternity and getting all that good stuff done. So Agmagan, while we don't really know, like, he's not really covered that much in the game, he definitely did contribute quite a bit to the lore back in the War of the Ancients. So Twisted Thorns are believed to have grown where the demigod fell, and these are the thorns that make up much of what we see in Razorfen Downs and Crawl. The Quilboar themselves are, well, they're sort of believed to be the mortal descendants of Agmagan, and it certainly makes sense because they are essentially boar people. Because of all this, the Quilboar pretty much revere the guy as god, which I guess is fair enough. Now, in the next part of the video, I'm going to talk a little bit about their culture and just how they are. Some of this stuff does come from the Warcraft RPG, and just the various source material for it. Now, this stuff is not specifically canon, but I think the majority of lore people consider it to be the truth until proven otherwise by non-RPG work, and it certainly does make a lot of sense. So the post-Shattering world was heavily damaged. Very, very heavily damaged. Just look at the Barrens. It's quite barren, as you might kind of realise, and because of this, really, there was not that many resources, and the Quilboar and the Centaur and the Tauren essentially spent a long time fighting over resources, and it definitely seems to me that the Centaur and the Quilboar really didn't come off that well from this engagement. According to the Warcraft RPG's Monster Manual, they are basically now terrorists. They take what they can from those who are weaker than them. They believe in strength, which means that, well, weak children are pretty much abandoned, and ultimately the survival of their race does depend on strong warriors who are able to steal the resources that they need. They kinda scrape by from day to day, essentially. It's just a very basic existence, and it's all filled with blood and war and killing things, which I suppose isn't too nice. They are a shamanistic society with their religious and political leaders essentially being the same thing. They're split into tribes, and every tribe is led by a shaman, I suppose, as is common for many of the more beast races of Azeroth. From what I can gather from the Monster Manual, there is a lot of competition between tribes, so they're not always friendly. I guess everyone rallies behind one shaman, and they're all competing for the same resources, so it definitely does make sense that there's a decent amount of infighting there. One interesting thing that I found was the kind of difference between Quilboar men and women in society. And the women have to cover their heads, faces, and quills, and they're pretty much relegated to procreation, which isn't too nice. Bar their coverings, apparently they're supposed to be killed on sight if they try to wear any other adornments or try to grab a weapon. Oddly enough, it seems like they're actually happy with this, and they're essentially treated with respect from the males. I guess the explanation behind this is because they all know that these are things that are supposedly for the good of the tribe, and really, for the good of the tribe is the justification for a lot of horrible things from the Quilboar. The males are quite a bit more bulky than the females. They're about half a foot taller and nearly double the weight, so they make up pretty good warriors. However, females who prove themselves to be good warriors are also respected and allowed to fight. Now, how they're able to go about doing this without being killed for touching a weapon, I'm not sure, so maybe there's a little bit of a contradiction there in the lore book, but, well, I guess we'll just have to take that for what we will. Basically, I think there's probably more, the exception, I suppose, that really prove themselves in combat. So maybe if they're jumped by something and they, in some sort of show of badassery, manage to kill it, then they'll be allowed to be warriors or something like that. Still, overall, it's not too nice, I guess, when viewed from our modern eyes. Next, we have the elderly and the cripples. Well, they are not able to fight because of their state, and they often basically commit suicide willingly. A lot of them realize that they're just a drain of resources on the tribe, and that since they can't go out and hunt for food or lead raids against caravans or something like that, basically they may as well just die, which is really shitty, but I suppose given their existence at the minute, I guess it kind of makes a twisted form of sense. Usually they don't just flat out commit suicide. What they do is something that's, I suppose, considered to be quite honourable, where they will go like a solo sort of mission to attack some enemies, basically a suicide mission, or they could go wandering into the wilds to defeat some dangerous animals that have been threatening the tribe. So overall, they operate in a very Darwinistic level, and often when the weakest are killed, there's a bit of celebration because everyone knows that because the weakest person is killed, the tribe is now, I suppose they're not really caring for weak people. I guess that really only makes sense as long as they have sort of enough members to keep the tribe going. And apparently even those who are killed, if they know they're weak, they're not really too sad about it because they know that their death lets the tribe move on. Very kind of weird, but yeah, there you go. They are very fiercely territorial, and this is probably because they just don't have a great deal of land. There's RFK and RFD, and then maybe a few other places, but really there isn't a giant amount, and the Tauren have been beating them back. I know the Tauren in some locations, such as say in the starter zone, are having quite the war with them, but eventually the Tauren win, you know? So yeah, they don't have a lot of land. And according to the RPG, they fight very well in packs, and they actually have a pretty decent level of tactical skill. They'll try to hold formations, they'll flank their enemies and things like that. And I suppose this is born out of the fact that they don't have infinite numbers, and they are individually quite big in terms of mass, so when they fight as a pack, they can actually pull off some good stuff. That is reflected in the armor that you see when they're walking around the place. Often they do have a kind of... yeah, they do have decent armor, I suppose. Very basic, though. So, anyway, yeah, overall, they're very barbaric and quite a horrible society, which I guess is not really atypical of a random race of enemies that you may encounter in an MMO. So next, let's talk about their dungeons. Razorfen Kraul is their ancestral home, so let's just read the official description. The great mass of Razorfen Crawl was discovered by an old crony, Chargla Razorflank, interesting name. Under her rule, the shamanistic Quillboar stage attacks on rival tribes as well as horde villages. Some speculate that Chargla has even been negotiating with agents of the Scourge, aligning her tribe, her unsuspecting tribe, with the ranks of the undead for some insidious purpose. And, yeah, she's definitely not too nice, but let's just go over some of the things that are inside the dungeon itself. So first of all, we have, I'm just going to go over some of the more lore relevant bosses, I suppose. The first one is Death Speaker Jargla, or something like that, and he is a prophet of their religion who's teaching that the fallen demigod will rise from the dead. Now, because they say rise from the dead, to me this pretty much means that he is probably sort of in the whole thing with the clan leader, and perhaps one of the reasons they're aligning themselves with the Scourge is so the Scourge can somehow bring back Amagan, which is their demigod. I guess that does make sense. The next one is Agathrelos the Raging. Sometimes they really sound like they're running out of names, and he is just a massive boar, like a big-ass fucking boar, and its massive size has led to it being pretty much held in very high regard because it bears a likeness to their god, which I suppose makes perfect sense. Then finally we have Chargla Razorflank, who is the end boss and the leader of both the Death's Hand and Razorfen tribe. She spearheaded a lot of aggression against other tribes and the Horde, and is essentially responsible for the dealings with the Scourge. Now, while we're on the topic of the Scourge, let's talk about Razorfen Downs. Here's the official description. Crafted from the same mighty vines as Razorfen Crawl, Razorfen Downs is the traditional capital city of the Quilboar race. The sprawling, thorn-ridden labyrinths house a veritable army of loyal Quilboar, as well as their high priest, the Death's Hand tribe. Recently, however, a looming shadow has fallen over the crude den. Agents of the Undead Scourge, led by the Lich, Amenar the Coldbringer, have taken control over the Quilboar race and turned the Maze of Thorns into a bastion of undead might. Now the Quilboar fight a desperate battle to reclaim their beloved city before Amenar spreads control across the Barrens. So yeah, there you go. Now, while this does mention the Barrens, this place has been located to 1,000 Needles. None of these bosses are really too lore relevant. Honestly, they're just kind of undead X, Y, and Z. I suppose apart from Amenar the Coldbringer himself, he's basically just a big old lich, and he's responsible for what's going on, and the whole trying to take control of the Quilboar. Also, of course, I suppose it's probably obvious, but the Death's Hand tribe are essentially the Quilboar who are kind of in the whole thing with the undead. The only other boss that's probably worth mentioning is Mordesh Fireeye, who was, I suppose, pretty well remembered back in Vanilla because he was essentially a dancing skeleton with fireballs, which I suppose is supposed to be humorous. Anyway, 10 minutes about a random-ass species in the game. I think that's pretty good going. So that's it for the video. If you want to support the channel, please check the links and stuff in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.